I mean, every single experience I've had along that, you have to do.
I don't know if for anyone else, I have winter blues as well. When the sun goes down, I'm like, oh.
Nothing to say there's a blue Monday, that the blue Monday doesn't exist.
Somebody told me once that January 2nd December.
So maybe just assessing like how much am I putting onto myself on top of having to do.
I'm like, okay, I'm gonna rest, cuddly blanket, but then my brain is like.
I used to do 3 minutes meditation.
Why is particularly at this time important for taking care of your mental health?
The older you get, the harder it is to balance everything. If you can have flexibility, it's very powerful. We facilitate people to find their own way.
Organizations that don't fail, it's the people that are not managed well. What does being a unifier mean to you? Hi everyone, so we're doing something a bit new. We, as you know, a lot of you have attended a lot of our Building Bridges in Business webinars, online calls. We thought that this year, let's talk to people all over the place, invite them to our office and ultimately have conversations, bridging conversations on how we can create a more unified business, unified work and become unifiers ourselves. So, you know, January is a time where a lot of us are broke. It's a time where a lot of us are reflecting on the year that we're going to have. And it's a time for a lot of us that we are not going to be in the best moods of moods. So I am joined by a wonderful individual, a friend, a fellow psychologist here, and we're going to have a conversation as to how we can get through, particularly this time of the year when we are feeling not the best of ourselves. So I'm joined by Susan Quain. Susan, can you introduce yourself? Hello.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, I'm Susan. I used to be a teacher. I was a teacher for 10 years. I worked in a special school. And then I decided to change career into psychology. So yeah, I'm about 5 years in psychology now. I work mostly with children in CAMS, in Tusla, different places. And yeah, that's how I found my way into psychology. So change of career for me, yeah.
And what kind of drove you to the work of psychology? What was the instigator? Because a lot of people, they think psychology, okay, why? What?
Yeah.
It's not a huge money driver and things like that.
Yeah,
what
yeah.
drove you to get into it?
Oh, it's really the passion for it. Like when I was a teacher, I was 10 years in a special school and I worked a lot with kids that had a variety of different disabilities, learning difficulties. And mental health just goes with that. You know, it's so connected and having those struggles in the world as a disabled person or as you know, a young person who deals with a lot of stigma. It's just so much of the mental health is connected to that. So while I was working, obviously my job was to teach English, Irish, maths, get them through exams, that kind of stuff. But I always found myself drawn to those kids that were really struggling with their mental health because you can't learn if that's how you feel in the classroom every day. So yeah, working with them and then kind of working with psychologists would come in to work with those kids. I kind of started looking and going, oh, do you know what? I think maybe that's more where I want to be. So yeah, I decided to just do a complete flip. Did a psychology degree part-time at the university, the Open University online. And then I went to UL, I did a master's in psychology, which is where we met. And yeah, so the goal was clinical psychology. And as you were saying, like, you'd want to have a passion. Like, it takes a lot of time and work and study.
How many years are you in now?
So I changed to psychology 14 years ago and I just got onto the clinical program this year.
How many years is that now?
Yeah, that's 14 years altogether,
Oh,
yeah. And then I have another 3 years for the clinical psychology program. But
So that's 15 years studying.
in total, yeah.
Wow,
That's
a whole
excluding-
teenager.
I know. That's my whole other life. But I always say, though, I don't feel like I've just been in a state of suspended nothingness. You know, I mean, every single experience I've had along that, you have to do a lot of work experience and, you know, the 2 years in UL and us, we did so many different things then, you know. So I always felt like I was always a psychologist. I was always working as a psychologist. I just don't have my doctor on it. I'm sure you can relate to that feeling, right?
The doctor will come.
It will get there and then I can practice clinically. But yeah, it's still, the 14 years was long, but yeah, great. I loved it.
And do you have to do like a specific thesis to become a doctor in clinical psychology or?
It's really broad. You
really
could do
broad.
anything, yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, my specific interest is kind of working around sexual health and positive, you know, healthy sexual relationships for young people. That's my area of interest. But that's what I'll do my thesis on. But you could do it on neuropsychology. You could do it on, you know, depression. You can do it on, you know, any kind of. It's really, really broad. So yeah, anything from, you know, like working with young people and babies in, you know, the maternity hospital all the way up to end of life stuff.
Wow.
So super.
That's super
varied,
interesting.
yeah.
And I find a lot of people, they don't realize that when it comes to looking at human behavior, when it comes to understanding psychology, that it's so broad and there's so many different ways that we can actually look at it. But coming back to this conversation, it's really hard for a lot of people to kind of get through, let's say, this period of January's here, we have our New Year's resolutions, I'm trying to get better for myself. It can be quite a lot of pressure, and especially, I don't know if for anyone else, I have winter blues as well. When the sun goes down, I'm like, oh, why is life for... So like, in terms of even for people managing this sort of time of the year, how would you, as a clinical or coming up to be a clinical psychologist, how would you like recommend for people to kind of get better in their mental health during this time, you know?
Well, I think everybody's different and everyone's going to have their own way. But I know myself, like, as you're saying, I mean, I love journaling, right? And I love planning and I love doing my yearly plans and all of that. But it can be a lot of pressure to get up on the 1st of January and go, right, I'm going to sit down here now and I'll make this goal for the year. And it definitely, as on my path, I know that sometimes goals can take way longer than a year, you know. So it's a lot of pressure. I think you kind of, I love this dry January thing that a lot of people do that, you know, because we're out a lot, December, even November, you know, you're out a lot, you're spending a lot of money, you're eating a lot, you're drinking a lot, you're, you know, doing whatever you have, visiting people, doing a lot. And then your body doesn't really get a chance to recover to that. And then all the, you know, the colourful lights come down and everything, and then it's just grim, right? And that's why they say that about that Blue Monday, which there isn't actually any research to say that that's a specific thing. Like
there's no research.
There's there's nothing to say there's a Blue Monday.
Okay.
That the Blue Monday doesn't exist, right? But I think what that reflects really is an understanding, like socially and culturally, that we do feel rubbish, like, you know, around that time. And like seasonal affective disorder is a real thing. And people do genuinely, some people...
Is that what it's called, seasonal affective?
Yeah, sad, okay. Which is very
which
fitting.
Is great acronym because we are sad.
Yeah, so seasonal affective disorder would be when somebody feels particularly like depressed or down at a particular time of year, which is normally the winter. Yeah, there is. Yeah, you can get a diagnosis of that. And it would often go with, say, somebody who may be susceptible to kind of periods of, like if you had bipolar disorder, you might get it particularly, you know, in January, early in the year when it's dark. And I think, you know, if we're looking at it realistically, like it makes sense, right? Because there's this high and then a low, as you said, nobody has any money. It's freezing cold. I've just been snowed in Limerick for the last week. Couldn't even leave the house with real COVID vibes down there. Like,
you're like, you know, you're like, coming back.
Yeah. We're back again. Yeah. So it makes sense, you know, but I guess it's like, how do we respond to that in a way, as you're saying, to be kind to ourselves? Because if you're feeling that way and then you're like, right, I'm going to start the gym now. I haven't been to the gym in 6 months, but I'm going to start on the 1st of January. And I'm going to... Yeah, it just feels like not the best time to you know, or I'm going to write my goals for the year now and I'm going to sit down. And like what we know as well about like New Year's resolutions is the vast majority of them do fall through. So I suppose I was chatting to somebody about this recently and I was saying, what I tend to do for January is like, I tend to take that time more so to reflect on the year and more so to kind of, it's like this idea of like a semi-hibernation, do you know? So it's like I'll take this month to really slow down, not go out too much, try to, you know, survive with the amount of money that I have and start my New Year's resolutions and all of that stuff in early February. Yeah, and it just seems to make a lot more sense.
Somebody told me once that January is 2nd December.
Yeah.
So we can actually get back into things,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah. And I guess, like, I suppose from a evolutionary psychology thing, that's the kind of the approach that I kind of like to think about it. Because I mean, if we go back to like ourselves as cave men and women and people and running around and doing whatever, like you weren't out hunting in the depths of winter. You know, it was cold, it was snowy, it was dangerous. There was more of a chance, you know, it gets darker sooner, like especially in this kind of latitude, you know, in Ireland. So, you know, like, you have more energy in the day. The sun is there longer. You're out long. You wake up and go to work and you still do stuff in the evenings, do you know? So it's like we have this idea in a society, right? And the capitalism tells us it's got to be 9 to 5 every single day, all year round. But does it? Do you know, like, is that really the best thing for us, for our circadian rhythm, for like what our bodies are saying to us, you know? getting up in the morning and it's pitch black, and we're all experiencing this at the moment. Yeah. You're working all day, you're coming home and it's still dark. Like, and you're not getting out and doing anything for exercise because you're working all day.
And is that, like, I understand that things change, but like, do you think that things should change for, let's say, the body when it comes to working? Because we can't ultimately change what the working day is or a company is.
Yeah.
But like, how can somebody, especially if they're feeling in that moment, or they have to go to work, they have to show up, they have to do, how can somebody support themselves as they go through it? Because of course we do live in this sort of big productivity, boom, 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 go, go, go all the time. And it can be hard, especially in these moments of times when you're trying to keep up with everything, but also you need to take care of your mental health. So what would you recommend to somebody in that space?
Like, it's really tricky, isn't it? Like, and it depends. My husband is an accountant, and the first week of January is hell for him. It's straight back into, like, you know, getting all your annual reports together and all of that. So it obviously depends on where you work, but like, to any degree that you can kind of try to reduce the stresses on yourself, right? So again, that idea of straight back into the gym in January, like if you go into the gym in February, it's going to be much more quieter. You're going to get your machines faster. So maybe just assessing, like, how much am I putting onto myself on top of having to do a 7 or 8 hour day, which is the reality of the world that we live in as well, and the reality for leaders. You know, you can't just tell your people that, you know, but yeah, I suppose this week when we had the snow, my own employer reduced our workday from 10 to 4. And some employers will, so some employers will have that. And I suppose if you have that kind of a power that you can do that and it's not going to affect your business too much, like, I think your employees would really, really appreciate that. And it could be an argument to say, look, how do you feel about kind of flexi time? And we'll make those hours back up when the sun comes back in March. And maybe do like a bit of overtime, and you can have that little bit of flexibility. And if you don't have it, then I think myself, what I'm doing at the moment now is yoga, right? And I, you know, I had thought about, we'll go down to the gym, we'll do some heavy weights or whatever, but you know what, yoga, nice cuddly blanket, sitting down in the evening, lighting the fire, and just saying, you know, January is that time to just rebuild, do a bit of meditation in the evenings, like, and I know that's not for everybody, but these skills are things that, like, you need to build up over time, and doing it now when it's dark and miserable and building up those kind of self-care skills makes more sense to me than saying, look, why would you sit inside meditating on a beautiful sunny day when you could be out running or hiking or something? So maybe just thinking about, those kind of...
And for someone who's like new to self-care or doesn't know how to take care of themselves, or is in, like, I'm just calling myself out, who is in constant productivity mode and is trying to, like, where do they start? What can they, is there any strategies that they can start doing to just be like, okay, I need to start taking care of myself? I notice for myself, like, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna rest, cuddly blanket, but then my brain is like, so where do you think somebody like that can start?
Okay, so coming from a recovered workaholic, I had that struggle. Like, I had that struggle for sure. And I remember, like, being in a yoga class one time, and just, she was like, silence your mind. And I was like, like, that's not a thing. Like, that doesn't happen. And definitely it was really hard for me. And how I managed to get myself out of that, and it took a long time, was like, it was actually through meditation, right? And I used to do 3 minutes meditation using the Headspace app, right? And they have really these little 3 minutes, and I'm just going to do 3 minutes because that's literally all I can do. Like, I can't do more than that. I just can't. So I do 3 minutes, and I did 3 minutes every day during COVID. That's when I started doing it. And I did it 3 minutes every day. And then I was able to go to 5 minutes after ages, like after a couple of weeks. And it has to be those tiny little steps, because, like, self-care is so unique as well, right? So journaling is another thing that I like to do. And so I get up early every Wednesday, and I go earlier than I usually would to work, and I spend a half an hour in this little coffee shop across from work, and I sit down and I journal. And I do that. It's just 30 minutes, but I make sure that I do that every week. And I won't get an opportunity for the rest of the week because I'm running around like a headless chicken. But I think it's just about carving out something really, really small, right? And the cuddly blanket in front of the fire isn't for everyone. Like, I kind of find my husband likes to watch TV, and I'll be there half reading a book, watching it, half in it. And, you know, it was so, but then sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to go to a coffee shop and read my book, and I'm going to leave my phone at home, and I'm just going to give myself So I think for me, it's really about carving something out for yourself, but in a tiny way. And then building on it, because if you're like that high cortisol kind of person, right? So I totally relate, and we're working all the time.
What does high cortisol mean?
Yeah, so when you're in a state of stress, right, you'll know about adrenaline, right? So if a tiger jumps out and attacks you, right, you've got adrenaline, right? And but cortisol is more like the long-term kind of a. So if you're a farmer and your crops are starting to fail, that worry all the time, right? Of like, what if they fail? What am I going to do? What am I going to do to the family, right? But cortisol isn't supposed to be there all the time, right? You're supposed to have ups and downs. But when we're in a stressful work situation, right, and you're always busy and there's always a crisis and the mics don't set up and you know what I mean? And like, you just got these little things all the time. Your body's flooded by cortisol all the time. And it's not like adrenaline, which comes in a big burst, and then when the attack is over, it goes away and you kind of calm down, your heart rate comes down. Cortisol takes longer to come out of your system. So if you're always in a straight state of stress, even if it's just low level stuff, your body's flooded by cortisol and it doesn't disappear. So when you sit down then later that night and you're like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch this TV or I'm going to read this book, your brain doesn't stop going. And you know, it's that feeling of like that you can't sleep. So to reduce your cortisol, like it has to be, like it also has to be a slow process as well. Like, you know, you can't get rid of it quickly. So just bringing those little moments in and then slowly expanding on them as much as you can, and over time kind of bringing yourself out of that state of stress. But like, yeah, there's no quick answer to it, but being aware of it is a big step, do you know? And you'd see lots of stuff online about like different cortisol releasing yoga and things, and they do work too, but tell a person full of cortisol to sit down 45 minutes to do a cortisol workout. No. Like,
I have 5 minutes, that's
it. Yeah. But use those 5 minutes and build on that. And then, you know, when you get really used to the 5 minutes, it's like coming in here 5 minutes early and then building it to 10 minutes and, you know, like building up slowly. Yeah, that's the only way to do it. Like.
And can I ask you, like, why does kind of all of this matter, if you get what I mean? Because I find people will be like, especially like in dry January, trying to reduce stress, trying to get back into things. Some people may think, okay, well, it's just one of those things. It just has to happen. But why is particularly at this time important for taking care of your mental health?
Like in January?
In January and in general as well.
I think when we're younger, like I'm 46 actually now, was my birthday during the week, right? So I'm getting closer to 50 now than 40, right? It just gets, when you're young, you have so much energy, right? And you can just do it. And I did it for years. And you just have this endless energy. And then, you know, if you do decide to have children or not, or whatever it is, the older you get, the harder it is to balance everything, you know? And if you don't have the capacity, but you've created a life where you're constantly going, like I did, right? It collapses. It does collapse, like, and it doesn't work out. So I think that, and then you're forced to, right? Like I was, you're forced to really say, okay, I need to change something and I need to do something. And that's tough because it's very hard to manage. But if you can start doing it now when you're younger, you know, or earlier in your career and kind of just really plan for that self-care piece alongside work and alongside a busy life and whatever it is that you're doing, you can prevent that in the future, do you know? Plus, like, we know that high levels of cortisol is connected to, you know, fibromyalgia and like gut problems, physical pain, and because what they say is that it gets capped, kind of stuck in your joints, and you know, so there's a lot of research that show that living a really high stress life, going on go all the time, has an impact on your physical health as well and your mental health. So yeah, and it's hard, I think, when you're passionate about work, and you see a lot of people are passionate about their work and their, you know, interests and hobbies and creativity. So yeah,
I think when it comes to like moving past it and moving through it, like you said, being aware of it first and having that click moment is so important for people to actually be like, okay, now I need to take the steps to it, regardless of if it's a high stress environment, then now I need to take care of my mental health, or it is I'm actually sad in this period. Now I need to take care of my mental health. Having that awareness is hugely essential, and trying to support the people who are around you when they're through those moments is hugely essential. So what would you recommend to somebody that, like, you may see a friend, you may see a family member or colleague even, that you can just see that they're going into something, a funk?
I know.
What would you recommend to support that person?
Yeah, I think it's lovely that you're thinking that way anyway, because a lot of people miss those things. And I just think, I know you're going to totally agree with this anyway, but a lot of times it's the fear of saying something. People don't want to say something. Like, they're feeling, it's your own discomfort, isn't it? Like, I don't want to say, God, are you okay? In case somebody goes, actually, I'm not okay. And then not knowing what to do, you know. And just listening is so, like, really the most powerful thing, I think. When I was a teacher, I worked a lot with kids that had a lot of problems, and I always felt like, oh, I wish I could have done more. And now as a psychologist, I look back at myself then and said, actually, because I couldn't do anything, I didn't say anything, I just listened, because I didn't have any answers. And now I'm like, oh, I'd still do the same thing now with all of this experience. So just sitting down and going, you have to notice that things aren't good, what's going on, and then just really being with that person in the sadness rather than trying to drag them out of it, you know, because like, it is hard. And some people, especially if they have seasonal affective disorder, like, you're not going to change that by, you know, talking about it or whatever, but giving them the space to know that it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to be broke and the weather is rubbish and you're really tired, and just being with that, because it passes, do you know, it does pass. So yeah, but I think the awareness is so important, and we're also different as well. Like, I mean, my idea of something that's soothing and rejuvenating to me might not be what you're interested in, you know. So it's like, you know, is there anything we can do that would make you feel better? Like, I'd love to go for a coffee, I'd love to go for a hike, but what would you like to do? Maybe you'd like to go and see some live music. Maybe getting out of the house is what you need, or maybe let's sit in and watch a movie, or maybe just nothing, maybe just, oh, I'll get back to you in February. That's okay too, like, yeah. Letting them lead it, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and having the person kind of guide. For me, that's I'm very much a fixer.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, tell me the problem, and I'll go and help you fix it. But like you were saying, a lot of times it's very just like, just sitting there and being listening and being affirming. And I find what I do is sometimes even ask, like, okay, what would you want me to do right now? Do you want me to listen to you? Do you want me to help you problem solve and strategize?
Lovely,
or do you want me to let's go for a walk kind of thing?
Yeah.
What do you actually want? And then the person will tell me, and they're like, oh, no one else never asked me. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, what do you need is such a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, what you need right now. And then it helps you as the receiver to be like, okay, I don't need to do my instinct of fixing, because sometimes people just want to vent, or sometimes people just want to be in the sadness, and that's okay completely. So it's important. And particularly for us, like in Garma, we work a lot with people in the workplace, working out in diversity inclusion initiatives and supporting in well-being as well. Like, what can workplaces start to do, especially like, you have deadlines, you have things, you have clients, you have those are the main objective of a workplace. But when a lot of people are going through this period of like just trying to get their mental health better during this time, what would you recommend a workplace to do?
It just so depends on the business itself, doesn't it, and the business model. And I mean, I think flexibility is such a huge thing. Like, if you can have flexibility, it's very powerful. So like, and like I said, that my husband's industry certainly know, like, January is just busy. But I mean, suppose in that circumstance they let him work from home a couple of days. Right now it was very snowy, so he would have been allowed anyway. But that kind of flexibility, look, I know it's a bit miserable, because, you know, something like, in this weather, in this horrible weather, sometimes the worst part is getting to and from work. It's not actually when you're there. So, you know, if they have that flexibility, and then I suppose being conscious as well of, you know, different kind of nationalities and ethnic groups and different people. Like, so if you have somebody who's spent the first 30 years of their lives living in a tropical climate, now also trying to, like, what we're so used to, they could be like, what, it's dark at 5 o'clock, this is insane, you know, I've never had to experience this before. So it can be particularly difficult for some people compared to other people.
I have a friend that just moved from Nigeria to Ireland, and he was just like, I don't like this.
No.
It's so cold and dark, and he'd never experienced the actual, like, the what is it? This is it sad? I don't know if it's diagnosed, but he just felt down, and I was like, I've never experienced it, and like it could be the weather, and he's like, never thought of it that way, and I'm like, yeah, some people just get seasonal sadness because of the darkness, you know. So it's hard for people to accommodate for those cultural differences too.
So I think being aware of that is in the workplace, you know, not assuming that everybody feels the same way, you know. And even I think as well, like having that open space that you're kind of saying, right, that it's okay to, you know, be open about like, because sometimes I think we have like toxic positivity type cultures, you know, where it's like, okay, everybody, it's January, let's get back on this now. We get stuck into year 2025. What can we achieve? You know, like to me, I always use January as an opportunity to reflect. And I've only started doing that in the last couple of years, and I found it really helpful. Just to say, this is my month to reflect, and I will start in February. So I don't. It's just, and it doesn't have to necessarily impact the work that's being done, but it's more the perspective or something. It takes that pressure off. So I don't know. It depends on your business, but yeah, if you're working inside an A&E, they're all coming in with the flu. You just, you know, you got to keep going. So I don't want to be idealistic, you know. But yeah, like I suppose. I think great leaders are always thinking like that, like what can I do here that can be subtle but can just change the atmosphere of the office or the business where I'm working, you know. And I think that can be
it's important for people to have that flexibility, and you're dead right in saying that, like, depending on the industry, like obviously we can't be telling A&E workers to go take an hour yoga just in the middle of the day. No, that won't work. It really depends on the industry, and having that flexibility, like you say, for leaders to tell leaders or even managers to tell their people to be like, hey, what do you need? It's the same tactic of like, what do you need right now? And sometimes even being a listening ear by the printer, someone may need that, and that could really help them for their day. So it's hugely essential. And I know, Susan, you work a lot with children, and you've worked with even other communities as well. Can you tell me some more about your experience working there?
Gosh, I worked with so many different, I suppose years ago we used to work together on a couple of different projects with refugees and asylum seekers. So we're involved with a really fantastic kind of an integration community project. Oh, I even just thinking about it, looking back, it was so lovely. But it was just this real, kind of psychological perspective of, you know, integration being a really kind of an active process. And I mean, my kids were small at the time. I used to bring them in, and you know, we just play and mix, and people would bring food from different cultures, and just get to know each other really and spend time together. You know, there wasn't any kind of specific like program there. It was just like, what do we do this week? Let's do arts and crafts activities, and next week we'll do a food share. We'll do, you know. So I did that for a good bit, and then I worked during COVID. Myself and my friend Bea set up an online tuition project. So it was coming up to Leaving Cert, Junior Cert, and I suppose, you know, I mean, people who are coming from like kind of privileged backgrounds are able to access things like tuition, and because they were out of school, so there was a lot of online tuition, and it was so expensive, and we just thought, you know, maybe we could do something to mitigate this for kind of for ethnic minorities and asylum seeker, refugees, traveller groups, that kind of thing. So we did that. We set it up, and it was really successful. We had a lot of kids involved in it, and the outcomes were really good. But yeah, just provided free tuition online for exam students from different backgrounds, and we recruited like loads of trainee teachers to provide those, and we had a whole system set up. Then we were providing reflection and kind of intercultural training for those teachers. So it was a real eye-opener for them as well, because they were all, every single one of them was white Irish as well, and had very little kind of, I suppose, experience working with those communities. So it was a really nice kind of a piece as well that, it was lovely. So did that, and then my experience working with special needs, with kids with special needs for 10 years, and then I worked with young people who were in trouble with the law, actually, for harmful sexualised behaviour for 2 years as well. So that was really interesting work, and now I work with kids with kind of moderate to severe mental health difficulties. So loads of experience, but that's what's so great about psychology, right? You just, and I could be doing something completely different next year again, you know. So
And how do you take care of yourself through all of that?
So
because it's a lot of heavy topics.
Yeah, it is. That's the best thing about psychology, I think, is that kind of, you know, you're surrounded by people who are also psychologists. So particularly now in the last like 5 or 6 years of my career, I always have excellent supervision. So I get supervision from another psychologist and we talk through everything. So I didn't have that in teaching. And I actually I wasn't able to leave it at work. You know, people used to say those phrases a lot, like, leave it at work. And people would say that to me in school. And it's like, how though? You know what, like...
Especially when your work involves a lot of vulnerabilities, you're thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
There's a thing called compassion fatigue.
Yes.
When you work, especially this is for those particularly in the social sector, where you work with vulnerable communities, you work with people who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, you tend to like, not empathize, but it's a natural human thing to just overgive that. Sometimes you forget about yourself, so it's hard to take care of yourself. It's good that you have that.
It's such a learning experience. Like, I don't want to pretend for 1 minute that that's something that came naturally. Like, that took me a long time to develop, like it really did. And I think it's so interesting that, you know, people who do overgive get drawn into these kind of careers. So like those of us who do get involved in psychology, social care, that kind of stuff, like a lot of the times we have difficulty setting boundaries because we want to help and we want to, and you know, you have to examine all of this white savior stuff as well that was going on for me for sure years ago, you know. And I worked in China it was an orphanage, that was just called, but it was a children's home, like for any kind of kid, loads of kids with disabilities. And yeah, for sure I had a perspective that I was going over there to save these kids, and that's something I had to work around as well. And like, it's very complex and it takes a lot of reflection, and you know, and it never ends. I mean, it's not like I've gotten to this stage right now here today where I've like all this stuff sorted out. None of us ever do, you know. But yeah, like I think I had to nearly go through handling that really badly. And then having to reflect on that and go, okay, I'm not looking after myself. Like, and I am taking this stuff.
When
like,
you say handling it badly, what happened?
Well, like I remember my Christmas being absolutely ruined one year because I just could not stop thinking about these two kids in my class and wondering where they were and did they have a Christmas dinner and were they even, you know, they both had really, really difficult background. It was just really awful situations for both of them. And I couldn't, and I was sitting there with my own family and I wasn't able to because I was just worrying about them so much, and that's not healthy. Like, you can't, and sure, what did all my worry do? It didn't help anything or fix anything. So yeah, having to work through that, I think, and accepting that you can do as much as you can do, like, and you can support, like, and we never really help people. Like, we facilitate people to find their own way, right? Yeah. So you the minute you stop thinking you can do something about it, right, that helps. And
especially for children as well, because you need to help them.
Yeah.
You know?
But like, you're never going to, it doesn't, I mean, those two kids in particular, like, that are just discussing there, like, I mean, I couldn't change the system that was in their home system of abuse and neglect. Like, there's nothing I can do about that. What I can do is try to give that child, a 6, 7, 8 hours in school, and where they're happy or supported or whatever, and maybe help them to individuate as adults. And then it's Tusla's job to look after the abuse and neglect at home. Like, that's not my role. And like, pulling that all apart can feel heartless. Sometimes you're like, oh, how can I just focus? But now I'm much better at that, and I think it's more effective. And you learn how to pull in resources from other places, and just, you have to be able to detach yourself a little bit. Of course I care, but like, yeah, I'm a big believer, actually, just even in a self-care thing. I work about a half an hour from my home, and my drive home is absolutely a self-care thing. You know, when we talk about like carving out a little piece of the day, it might be like your walk from the office to the car, or it might be your drive home, or it might be that you go to a coffee shop to sit down and relax after work just to get your headspace. But I think the mistake that I was making back then was I was leaving school, driving, collecting my kids, going home, cooking dinner. You know, there was no break there. So now my half an hour is like, whatever happened in work today, whatever terrible stories I've heard or whatever stress I've had to sit with, I take that half an hour to, you know, like, and sometimes it's like listening to really happy music. Sometimes it's like sitting in silence. So sometimes it's, you know, doing a bit of a meditation or something, like, obviously not my eyes closed, but, you know, doing a breathing activity or whatever, because I've had a really tough day, and then getting out of the car and leaving it in the car and leaving it in, you know, where I work. So I think that there is no, like, I'd love to be able to give people a formula, but I think you do have to go through that. Because sometimes I hear terrible things now when people say, oh my God, like, how does that not upset you? And I'm like, it does, but I've got a skill now where I can go, that stays there, and I'll go back in on Monday and it'll be there and we'll work with it. But yeah.
It's important, and I think a lot of people in the medical profession build that skill and resilience, because human compassion and empathy is, most of us have it, but if you are constantly being fed with despair and sadness all the time, it really can affect your own mental health and how you work with the rest of your loved ones and the people that need you essentially as well. So it's great that you actually built up that resilience to do the work that you did do and to engage with the communities and the people that you engage with. And it's great to hear that you're continuing onwards. And when it comes to circling back to the start of the conversation, when it comes to your own research as well, what are you looking into deeply? I know you're just starting out, and anybody who knows me, I'm like, what? I'm like,
you're just mad to know.
Oh, mad to know about the research, but I'm like, oh, PhD, starting that all. What are you looking into?
It's pretty kind of, sad stuff, I guess. I know I can have this kind of conversation with you, but I know a lot of the times when people ask me what my research is about, I tend to play it down because people just look at me like I'm crazy. No,
don't play it down. This is a space where we like to delve.
I worked with young people who've engaged in harmful sexualized behaviour for 2 years, and my master's research was about peer-on-peer harmful sexualized behaviour. So it's something that they're starting to talk about a little bit more now on the radio. The impact of pornography on young people's perceptions of sex is really a big interest to me, because when I worked with these young people, every single one of them had been influenced by what they see online on phones and pornography or whatever. And then, sometimes either enact this out, or it impacts their understanding of, like this kind of a really negative view of like what sex is, or how women should be treated, or, women as kind of worthless. And it really messes with their heads. So I'm really interested in that. There's not a huge amount of research in the area. So the research that I did for my master's was preventing harmful sexualized behaviour between young people with intellectual disabilities, because there's a whole other layer there as well. Sometimes they don't really understand, and they don't get proper sex ed at all. Like the mainstream sex ed is terrible, but the ID stuff is non-existent. Like, they just don't get it in most cases. So for my master's, I'm interested in looking specifically at either people with autism, because a lot of the time they might do things that people perceive as creepy or weird or sexualized, where actually it can be a lack of understanding about why that's inappropriate in a social setting. And then they could end up getting arrested and potentially sent to prison. And, it doesn't really feel fair that, especially when we don't provide them the proper education in school. Or female sex offenders actually is something I'm quite interested in looking into. There's very little research in that. Very stigmatized, obviously. But we need to understand this stuff, as dark as it is, and how difficult it is to look at. But there you go, like that's coming back to what we said earlier, where it's like I feel like I've really done a lot of the work to be able to go into those dark spaces. And I'm not saying it doesn't upset me. Of course it does. I've heard some terrible stuff in my research, but I can step out of it and go, okay, and I'll go home now and
that's
be in
great
my family.
that you can step out of it, because that's props to you, because it sounds very, very difficult to actually think about. I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, all these things sounds very difficult to think about it, let alone having to research it every single day. So really big props to you. And I know you're the director of Psychologist. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so Psychologist is my private business. I started it about 3 or 4 years ago. So I feel that when I was a teacher, like I didn't really have, you don't get any training. I don't know what it's like now, but I was trained 20 years ago to understand mental health difficulties. So you'd have a child presenting with like something as simple as anxiety, and really not knowing how to manage it. Now, it's not really a teacher's job, but the reality of it is we are dealing with kids that with all kind of behavioural, difficulties and challenges, anxiety, trauma, all of this stuff. And you're really going in blind and you don't know what to do about it. And when I started my training as a psychologist, then I don't know how many times I was like, oh, I wish somebody had told me that. And it was always these really simple things, like I just wish somebody had explained that to me before I went into the classroom, and I would have handled that child better, and I would have done that differently, and I would have done this. So Psyclass is basically training for teachers around those kind of concepts. So I have some online courses, but I also go into schools and I do teacher training, staff training. just on that, and it's very simple stuff. Like it's just that real basic kind of psychological stuff around fight, flight, freeze. You know, why a kid is blowing up over nothing. Like, you know, how do you react if you have a kid having a panic attack? What do you do to bring them down? And the teachers, I always get really good response because I know what it's like in the classroom. You know, and I think a lot of the times psychologists come into schools, and this is no shade on psychologists either, but like you're like, oh, I need you to do this, 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 and you're like, oh, I've got 30 kids here, like I can't just give up everything for these two or whatever. So I think I can understand that, and then I also go into secondary schools and I talk to teenagers about harmful sexualized behaviour and pornography, which is like, yeah, it's great when schools bring me in because I know that there's a big pushback from adults, from parents. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the new sex ed program, and you know the teachers are trying to teach kids about pornography and all this. Like obviously that's not. Look, we're trying to get them to be critical. You know, they're going to look at it. So that's the kind of talk that I go in and I talk to them very openly about that, and about, you know, how unhealthy relationships and what you see in porn is not necessarily like what real relationships look like or real intimacy looks like. So yeah, it's very varied. Psych class is quite varied. There's lots of different things going on, but I'm very proud of it.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's going really well. So
that's great. And do you do anything like in the workplace as well, in case people are watching and seeing?
True Germ. That's how I'm trying to hope into to get involved.
We work together.
Yeah. I do wellbeing, health and wellbeing for teachers. Yeah, and I do a good bit of that with schools and stuff. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, but they're not. They need to be doing it more. Like every business, everybody does. Like
they do.
It's a tough job. Like
when you're working with people, you have to be able to understand, and sometimes it's something that's so overlooked.
Yeah.
When you're working with people, well-being, mental health, and especially if you're working with children, like she said, sexual health as well. But that is something that needs to be at the forefront. Organizations that don't fail, it's the people that are not managed well.
Yeah.
So when you're working with people, you need to be able to understand how to cope with mental health, how to cope with well-being, how to cope with anxiety, how to cope with all the things that make us human. Because ultimately, if you have happy people, you have happy organizations, you have happy schools, you have happy everything. So it's super, super, super essential. And to close the conversation, Susan, I like to ask people this question. What does being a unifier mean to you?
Oh, wow. I just think it's just about constantly going out and making every attempt you can to really get to know people and understand people and integrate with people and mix with people. There's no other way I think we can just be unified, I guess, if we don't understand each other. Like I always think that when you have a conversation with somebody, say from whether it's in another country or a different ethnic group or a different kind of part, any different kind of, if you just sit down and listen and talk to them and you understand it better, you know. So I just feel, my husband's always laughing at me. He's like, will you stop making new friends? You have enough friends. They're like, I know. But yeah, just really broaden that out. Like I think travel is a great thing as well, and just really getting to see things from other perspectives. Like I spent a lot of time abroad when I was younger, and I think that's really helped me. Like I really encourage my children to go travel when they're older. Yeah, so just as many different friendships, relationships, connections, conversations that you can have with people with different perspectives. You don't have to agree. I force myself to listen to this podcast that's really, really like imperialistic British sometimes, and it's so hard for me. But I'm like, no, I'm going to listen to this guy's perspective. And you know, sometimes I'm like, okay, I can see that, even though it's triggering for me.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for joining us, and thanks for having the conversation with us. I know it's been your first one, so congratulations, and thank you so much, guys. If you're watching and you want more of Susan, where can people find you?
www.psychclass.ie.
Brilliant. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you in the next one.